Right.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you so much to those of you who are joining here in person and online. My name is Christina Gonzalez. I'm the executive producer of Politico's events for Europe, and I'm very delighted to be here with Nicholas Cumins, who is the CEO of Bentley Systems. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
I have to admit that when we think about sustainability, there are a lot of different ways in which we can think about that. And oftentimes for many people in this room, that could be, the buildings themselves or infrastructure. But oftentimes maybe we're not thinking about the systems that are actually building that infrastructure.
Right.
And so that's what I'm really excited to dig in with you here today over the next 15 minutes, let's say. 40, if only. We don't have that much time, but what I would love for you to start off with is if you can help us understand a bit more about Bentley Systems, first and foremost, and then we'll dig in more.
Okay, with pleasure. So, Bentley Systems is the infrastructure engineering software company. We are a software company, and we're dedicated to infrastructure. And what do we mean by infrastructure? Basically what makes other things possible. Roads, bridges, tunnels, the electric grid, the water network, etc. And we have software for pretty much all the engineering disciplines involved in the design of infrastructure assets, such as civil engineering, structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, etc., you name it. We offer software across asset classes. I mentioned a few of them already, but we also have software for wind towers and more. And then we cover all the phases of the infrastructure lifecycle, so design and construction and operations and maintenance. That's us in a nutshell. Now, we are a global company. We're headquartered in the US, but the majority of the colleagues are outside of the US. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not really American, and I'm based in France. So, bonjour.
Bonjour. And I am American, but not based in France. So here we are, global citizens here. Let's dive in more to specifically the aspect of the climate, because we see that the climate is certainly impacting infrastructure, not just here in Europe, but globally. Can you give us a sense of what you're seeing in terms of that pressure on infrastructure?
Well, so it's even more pressure. There's already pressure on infrastructure just to support economic growth. There is pressure on infrastructure to support energy transition, but there is pressure coming from climate change itself. So, take extreme heat, for example. Extreme heat will have impact on the asphalt of the roads. It will have impact on the structural integrity of some assets. It will have impact on the efficiency of the electric grid, which, by the way, is then compounded as an issue with the fact that people are going to turn on air conditioning more, and etc. So, think of droughts, of course, impact on the water infrastructure, including the water which is necessary to to generate hydroelectricity, or things of just floods and how they could potentially endanger over time. Depending on how often they occur, but they could endanger the foundation of roads and foundation of bridges. So, a lot of pressure indeed. And what it means is we need to be very proactive about this. We have a rather reactive stance overall as a community here, but we need to be more proactive about it. We need to actually think ahead of what could happen with climate change continuing with these extreme weather events. And that starts in planning and making sure we pick up sites that are maybe less prone for floods. It's in design where we need to leverage digital technology to simulate what could happen with, extreme heat or extreme cold or just ton of torrential water that is pouring into the asset. And then it's digital technology that can be leveraged during the operations and maintenance phase of the assets themselves, right? So, making sure that every asset has a digital twin, and with that digital twin, being able to simulate again what could happen, being able to detect any issue that could become a real problem in case of extreme heat or extreme cold, etc., and then take preemptive measures in order to resolve them. Yeah.
Can you help me understand a little bit more, sticking with the climate, about the need to focus on either adaptation of infrastructure as compared to the need to develop new infrastructure?
Well, I guess the climate change is making the situation even worse. And let me take a step back. There is a ton of demand for better, more resilient infrastructure. Okay. There's just not enough people to do it. right? And climate change and the impact of climate change on infrastructure means there's even more demand for it potentially. Now, because of this big gap between the demand and the available engineering capacity we can go and tap into in order to do the work, it cannot all be about new infrastructure going forward. It also has to be about the existing infrastructure. I think it's easy to assume 95% of infrastructure we'll have in 2030 already exists today.
Really?
So how do
95%?
Well, just think about it, right? Just the number of infrastructure assets all around us, right? So, but it's just something good to remind ourselves, which is then we need to think about the existing infrastructure. We need to think of adaptation in order to resolve for that equation, right? So it has to be about how we make the existing infrastructure last a little longer. How can we make it more resilient? How can we maybe increase its capacity so that we don't have to always build? We won't be able to build our way out of this, basically. Yeah.
You've used the word capacity a few times, and as far as I understand it, that also has to do with the capacity of the people who are actually working on these systems. So right. Here, do you mean when we're thinking about like the actual engineers or the minds that are focused on this, is that where you're seeing a gap? Engineers
in particular. I think if you talk to the CEO of any engineering consulting firm around the world, they will tell you their biggest challenge is they don't have enough people. I think for the water network, for example, in Europe, about 50% of the workforce, the engineering workforce for the water network, 50% will be gone in 10 years, in a decade.
Breaking news.
So it's all about, and we're just not, there are too many of them retiring, and we are not graduating enough engineers. I think on a relative basis, and even in an absolute basis, there's just less engineers graduating now, in some countries in Europe. So it's all about how you make the existing engineers more productive. How do you make them more productive? Now, of course, software plays a big role there. Software to, overall, as a community, they've always switched to software decades ago from paper, to using software for computer designn. No, that's easy, yeah. But software to help them, share data, to collaborate. Every year we have an event called Year in Infrastructure, and we have a global competition called the Going Digital Awards. And you have firms from all around the world who compete with each other on who's the most sophisticated in its use of software to drive productivity. And one example is a project actually closer to my home in France. It's the Canal Seine-Nord Europe. Where they had a productivity gain of about 40% just by having a connected data environment where all the engineering disciplines involved in a canal, you can think of a lot of them, structural, geotechnical again, and civil, etc., were all able to collaborate together and detect potential issues, potential clashes with their designs up front, resolve them, and that was indeed a 40% gain, right? So there's a lot of productivity you can gain by simply using software better, by having people collaborate better, by sharing data, making data available, etc. And then, of course, what is potentially a step change in productivity in our space, like so many other spaces, is AI. That leads to my next question. So you're doing all the hard work here. Go for it. I would like to better understand, given the evolution of AI, it feels like, at least from my standpoint, very quickly. Maybe that's been the case, that it's been involved already in the processes that you've used over years. But do you see an acceleration of that? And how are you seeing that changing the work that you do? So we see it, and it's very impressive. I mean, ChatGPT was launched just, a little bit more than 3 years ago now. And in this global competition I was talking about, we saw so many submissions this year of engineering firms who were leaning on AI in order to do things that were simply not possible before. One example was for a geothermal field optimization in Turkey. Okay, what does that mean? Geothermal. So geothermal as a source of potential energy, right? Okay. So you tap into high temperature geothermal in order and you tap into that heat in order to then being able to run turbines and then generate electricity. So, and it has to be in countries where you have a lot of tectonic activity, because this is where you're going to find some of those high temperature sources of geothermal energy. Anyway, so there was one project over there which was about an existing reservoir, but how to optimize it. And by using AI, they cut the development time by 80%. So instead of taking 5 years, it took just 1 year to optimize that geothermal field. And the way they did it is they ran millions of simulations in days using AI. It would have taken, they told me, 200, if not more, years without AI. Right? So in days. So AI now is not just about making engineers more productive, it's also about helping them do things that were simply not possible before. Right? This level of optimization is just amazing. And that's just one among so many examples of engineering firms we saw leveraging AI. Yeah. Now, I want to make sure something very clear, right? So in our space, like in other spaces, decisions have like material consequences in the real world when it comes to infrastructure. So no one here is talking about delegating decision-making to AI. Right? The use cases we see here are much more about AI that is empowering engineers, AI that is really, I guess it's a great word that Microsoft picked up, AI that is running as a co-pilot for the engineers and helping them be more productive. AI which is taking are doing all the mundane tasks, things that they just don't like to do, which is not the best use of their time, like generating drawings, annotating drawings, etc., so they can focus on the actual engineering work, right, the actual design work. And then AI that can run indeed simulations at a level which was simply unthinkable just a few years ago, right? So that's what we're talking about. Yeah, AI which is a co-pilot with a human in the loop always in our space.
And you use the word decision-making there, which would bring me on to my last question, which is about identifying the projects and the priorities that we're focusing on to apply those methods. Can you also unpack that a little bit in terms of any changes that might need to be made in terms of choosing projects as a result of these changes with technology?
So I will say from a European standpoint, I think the priorities for infrastructure investments are very clear, and there's a lot of investments going on, which is great at all levels of infrastructure. What's important is more about the how. Yeah? What we will welcome from policymakers is that they create some incentives to use digital technology for those projects. When you know how much digital technology can help to drive productivity, but also to make sure that infrastructure is going to become more resilient, this is really about potentially creating much more value from those infrastructure investments. Yeah? Along the lines, they should definitely insist for openness, something which is quite specific to our space. The infrastructure projects themselves can last years, sometimes even up to a decade. And then the assets, once they're built, they're going to be there for decades and decades. So the last thing you want is any vendor locked in. Right? There has to be like a total guarantee that the software which is being used for those infrastructure projects, for those infrastructure assets going forward, is as open as possible, that the data you put in, you're able to take it back at any point in time. Yeah? And that the software is interoperable with all sorts of other software which is going to be used, both to design, to build, and then to operate and maintain those assets. Then I will say from a procurement standpoint, there's a great initiative that is we're generally aligned with from EFCA, so the European Federation of Consultancy Associations, on how to evolve procurement when it comes to infrastructure projects. And the focus has to shift from the lowest bid, the lowest bid price, the lowest price, to the higher value.
What does that mean?
Which means there has to be a first and foremost a conversation about how do you make sure that we're going to get as much value as possible from that infrastructure asset, that it is being designed in the most efficient way, also from a carbon standpoint, by the way, and that it's going to be very resilient. It's going to be able to sustain climate change, right? So the danger, if the focus remains as too often on the lowest price, is that it's just a race for the bottom, and then shortcuts will be made. Shortcuts can be simply like pouring more concrete or pouring more steel into a foundation because we're concerned of, but not taking the time to really optimize that foundation to reduce the carbon footprint, for example, right? Or not thinking ahead enough about how to make sure those infrastructure assets are as resilient as they should be in the face of climate change.
And do you feel that policymakers or other stakeholders making those decisions understand those trade-offs and are considering other factors?
They need to understand even more, and that's why we're here. That's why we're sponsoring this event, right? That's why I'm in Brussels meeting with a number of people today, and that's why we actually have a team here in Brussels to make sure that there's really awareness here that digital technology and data can help. There has to be a realization that data is as essential to infrastructure as concrete and steel. Right? From data, you gain insights. From insight, you can make Europe more resilient, you can make Europe more sustainable, you can make Europe more competitive.
Well, on that note, we do have a networking break coming up right now, so folks can continue the conversation in the networking area. We will return here at 11:25, where our program will continue. Please help me thanking Nicholas very much for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you. Cheers.
We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?